Hello. At the end of this presentation, you'll be able to produce a Worthy map for the existing OKRs of your organization. Now, if you are not using OKRs yet, then you might be able to use a Worthy map to spot opportunities for objectives that are worthwhile to pursue. When you map, you graph your dependencies, and when you do this with a diverse group of people, then you'll be able to articulate why some of your higher level objectives are limited by constraints within your value chain and the systems that support it. Now, I'm convinced that when you do this, you'll gain a lot of situational awareness. And as a consequence of that, you'll be far more effective at implementing your strategy. So that's why my job is done here today, if you're as excited as I am about trying these ideas in your own context. Now, perhaps you came here today because you want to hear everything about Worthy maps, or maybe you were interested in just OKRs. But let me remind you that this talk is really about combining both of these topics together. But rest assured, I'm not going to assume you know either one of them. I'll make sure to cover the basics. Now, unfortunately for you, I'm going to be doing that using corny visual metaphors. So, my name is Marijn Huizendveld, and I work as an independent consultant for scale-ups in Europe. And most of my clients have a variation of the question, how can we remain effective now that we've significantly increased our headcount? Now, a while ago, I was at a conference like this, and somebody asked me at what level I operate when I work with my clients. And I thought it was an interesting question, but also simultaneously slightly amusing one, because it assumes we have a shared understanding of what levels exist. Now, when I work with clients, I think to be effective, you have to operate at 3 levels. First of all, you need to have tactical skills, right? And what is that? Well, we're at a tech conference. To me, that is, the team is able to solve problems, right? They're able to have conversations with experts on the topic that they're producing software for, and they're able to take that knowledge and to turn it into useful models that can power the software system. The team needs to be able to describe what the system is supposed to do using tests that aren't coupled to implementation, so that when the team wants to evolve the implementation, it's the tests that aren't holding them back, but it's the tests that are elevating them. They need to be able to hide the complexity of a subsystem behind an interface, so that when they're working with these models, they can focus on the business problem at hand rather than the technicalities of talking to other systems. And it's not just the technical things, right? It's also interpersonal stuff. For example, the ability to articulate and explain why you think one alternative is far more suitable solution in the current situation than all of the other alternatives that are to your availability. Now, let's imagine that a team has all of these skills, right? They're able to march very effectively, but maybe they're marching off in the wrong direction and they're walking off a cliff. So we need a bit more than just tactical ability, right? They need to have a sense of direction. Where are we going and why are we going there? And also, why are we going this route? Couldn't we have gone there another way? And it's also not just, where you're going, how you're going there, but also when should we change what we're doing? Is there maybe stuff that could happen in the world around us that should lead us to reassess the situation? And that's what strategy provides us, right? So on one hand, we need tactical ability. On the other hand, we need a strategy, a sense of purpose and direction of where we're going. But unfortunately, those 2 things aren't sufficient because we might be poorly organized. So what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to operate based on that strategy. We need to be able to turn tactical successes into strategic successes. So in order to be effective, I think you need to operate at the tactical, strategic, and operational level. So when I work with my clients, I often get handed a strategy. And the talk that I'll be sharing, the story that I'll be sharing with you today is what I've learned after being handed a strategy by a client. And let's get started diving in. So how does strategy help us? Imagine that we're on the road to success, right? This road. And we're cruising along with our team. And at some point, a team member shouts, "Wait, a pot of gold." Now, what do? Do we continue? Because on the road to success, at the end of it, There's something waiting for us that is far more beneficial than this pot of gold. Or is this perhaps the moment where we have to pivot? Because, well, we might have just struck upon a gold mine. So strategy allows us to sort of interpret the events that happen around us, right? It allows us to look at the world through a lens and to understand which events that are taking place are things that we need to take very seriously and which events are mere distractions, because we can definitely get distracted. Or to put it more nicely, strategy is all about observing the landscape and understanding how it's changing and using the resources that we have to maximize our chances of success. So the organization that I worked with used OKRs as their strategic lens, right? They used that as a way to interpret the world around them and to talk about that with their teams. So OKRs stands for objectives and key results. So the objective is something aspirational. It gets people jumping out of bed in the morning. It's why people care to work for this organization rather than another one, right? It's a big, audacious goal. It's qualitative. It's aspirational. Now, objectives and key results are something that we do within a fixed time scale. So we set a big goal that we have about a 50% chance of getting to, and we allow the team just enough time to reach that goal. A typical time scale is 3 months, but you're more than free to vary this. Now, key results are the metrics that inform us that we have, in fact, achieved the objective, right? So these are the quantitative measures that inform us that we have succeeded. Yes, our objective is within sight, right? Now, there actually is a silent H within OKRs. It's actually called OKR HMS, but that doesn't really roll off the tongue that nicely. And the H stands for health metrics. Now, these are the metrics that inform us that we're burning bridges that we don't want to be burning, or that we're sacrificing assets that would be very difficult to get access to again once they are gone. And that's very important, because we can mess up trying to achieve our objectives many times, but we can mess up our health only once. Let's look at an example. Finish the Phoenix project. Do you think that's a good objective? I see somebody shaking their head. No. And the reason for it is objectives need to be outcome-oriented, right? They should talk about like what we're trying to achieve rather than the specific thing that we're going to be doing. This is actually something that is very important, because that provides the team with the room to interpret how they want to achieve the goal, right? And that gives them a lot of autonomy, which is why this thing can work, right? We can't just give people crazy goals, but then tell them how to achieve them when they don't really feel comfortable using that plan. So let's imagine that we work for an organization like this, somebody that is trying to compete with the Gorillas, Getirs, and Flinks of the world. So we are working for Shopee Floppy. And what we're doing is we're delivering groceries to people in urban cities within 10 minutes. So imagine what an objective could look like for an organization like this that wants to enter markets. If we would have talked to the team, maybe we could have come up with something like this. Let's catapult ourselves into the market of everyday items, right? We've talked with everyone in the team and figured out language that resonated with these people. So it's not about setting cool language. It's about finding something that works with the team. We want to get these people literally jumping out of bed every morning, and this was what worked well with them. Now, here are some exemplary key results, right? Revenue of 100,000 euros within 30 days after launch, having 15% of customers refer friends and family, and 250 reviews, of which 80% is 4 stars or higher. Now, these are clear, quantitative measures that inform us that we have achieved the objective. Now, the thing is, what you measure and how you're measuring it is decided by the team, and that's why it needs to be challenged. Because first of all, we might be using metrics that are actually not really telling the story that we think they're telling, because the way things are measured are not optimal, or maybe the data is not as reliable. But also, we might be lying to ourselves, because we're effectively doing a self-assessment. It's sort of like, you will get to decide on your own grades. I see, you've passed all of your exams. So we want to make sure that we're transparent to the rest of the organization, how we're measuring these things, so that people can tell us when we might be lying to ourselves. Now let's look at some health metrics. So we invested a lot in recruiting a cool team. So we want to make sure that the team health stays at 3 out of 3, right? We want to make sure that their happiness is not deteriorating. And we also want to make sure that the cost of acquisition of an individual order, right? So the amount of marketing money that I'm throwing at getting new people to use our product is below the average order profit. I'm sure we can acquire customers if we give away groceries for free, but the question is if that's really a long-term viable business strategy. And of course, we want to make sure that the cash flow in exceeds the cash flow out, because the only reason why businesses go bankrupt is because they run out of money. So these are some exemplary health metrics that could help an organization like this. Now, OKRs commonly fail for a bunch of reasons, and these are the most the ones that I've seen a lot. One of them is set and forget. So we get people excited about OKRs, right? We set a great objective. It's outcome-oriented even. People are excited. We found the right language. We got good measures to find out if we've achieved it. Our key results are in order. The numbers are the data that we use is great. We set a time frame of 3 months. And then the first Monday after the workshop comes rolling around. And what do? We go back to business. We just do our regular thing, and another 11 Mondays roll by, and all of a sudden the quarter has passed, and we wonder, why didn't we make any of our objectives? So set and forget is basically, you do the first ceremony, and then you don't create any cadence around this, and as a consequence of it, you're not realizing the success that you were hoping for. Now, I was at a startup, and the goal of objectives and key results is to aim for the moon, right? But maybe you're too ambitious, like us, and you sort of aim for Mars. And as a consequence of that, you never really get the high of being able to achieve your objective, right? And that's very important, because this is what makes it fun for the team. Like sometimes you set a big and crazy goal, and then all of a sudden you've actually made it. You kind of thought it was sheer impossible up front. So having too ambitious goals robs the team of getting that sort of feedback loop going, where some of the times you're successful and you can be really proud of what you've accomplished, right? So let's leave aiming to Mars for Elon Musk, and let's just stick to more reasonable goals, right? Now, the opposite might be happening as well, right? Maybe you're working in an organization where people punish failure, right? And so as a consequence, we are always very careful not to set goals that are too crazy. And yeah, with that, we're really robbing ourselves of quality results, right? It might actually be worse because there's so much ceremony around it. Maybe you would be better off with a traditional project management approach rather than OKRifying low and unambitious goals. Now, when we're setting goals, right, when we're setting these objectives and we're doing that, we have to do that with people that have an understanding of what our organization is doing. Now, the great thing is that we're doing it with people that have an understanding of what they're doing, but the downside is also that we're doing it with people that understand what we're doing as an organization. They will have ideas on how to implement some of these things that we want to accomplish. And so they might get prescriptive, right? They will make decisions for the team how to go about and achieve the results that we're aiming for. And that, as a consequence, robs the team of autonomy, and then we're sort of back into output land, right? And we don't want that. So you have to make sure that we leave decision-making up to the teams rather than that we start to do that for them when we're setting the goals initially. Now, finally, no business goals. It might seem obvious, but although replacing Kafka with cloud-native technology might be a valuable initiative, it's not something that we should capture within an OKR framework. It's not something that will make any business impact where our customers are going to suddenly choose for us. So we want to make sure that we have business goals that captivate our users. Now, one way to deal with all of these problems that I was mentioning is the status email. It's a way to set cadence. So it's an email that you're going to send every week. And what you will do is you communicate what the confidence of your team was and how that's changing, right? And it's important to add some simple visual cues so that it's easy for people to quickly grasp this email, right? You talk about sort of what are the most important things that you worked on last week and what are the most important things that you're going to work on next week. Now I'm saying things, but I would recommend to really limit that to 1, maybe 2. But obviously, sometimes reality is that you might be doing more things, but it's always better to focus on less to make sure that you do those things very well. We could talk about risks and blockers, and really this section is not about complaining about why it's not working. It's about asking people for help effectively, right? So we want to make sure that this area is actionable. We're not here to whine about what's not working. We're here to seek help from people that can get us unstuck. There's a general notes-taking section. Now, don't use that for novel writing practice. Just 2 or 3 sentences of what you're proud of that the team accomplished this week or what you're looking forward to next week. Make sure that it's fun to read also, because what you'll be doing is you'll be sending it to anyone who's interested. And this will get you in trouble. Now, I know this because I speak from experience. Because once you start to share this stuff with the rest of the organization, someone is going to go out there and weaponize the hell out of it. So that happened to me. We were working on a project and somebody else had another project, a Salesforce implementation, and they would really like to have the budget that was allocated to us. And he said, like, well, wait a minute, we're doing that? I could do so much more with that over here. Now, this person was really aggressive about it, and it was really not pleasant. Obviously, that's not fun, but in principle, I welcome the idea, right? Because it's going to help us be more effective as an organization as a whole. So I love OKRs when done right, and done right to me means that they're outcome-oriented. So it's not output, but outcome. It's a clear business goal, not something technical. We have health metrics to inform us when we're sacrificing things that we don't want to be sacrificing. We have frequent check-ins to make sure that we can report on our confidence. And we do that through a status email so that we make sure that everybody can speak up when we think that things are going in the wrong direction. So back to my client. Here it is. Our strategy for the current quarter and the next quarter. It's there are OKRs in a presentation with 17 pages, font size 9, no pictures. I was like, what? There are a lot of moving parts, right? It's sort of difficult to comprehend how all of these things relate to one another, and it also doesn't really match with what I'm observing when I look at the actual teams that are working on some of these things. So I find it really awkward to relate these two worlds. And I just thought, like, you know what? Here's what we do with that strategy. No, not like that. Like this. And let's look at it from a different angle, because by doing that, we might get a valuable insight, right? So I don't know, have you ever walked around in Paris and, a bunch of tourists come up to you and they're like, could you tell me how to get to Arc de Triomphe? And your phone is dead, so you're say like, yeah, sure. It's like, okay, cross the bridge here. And then the second block, you go to the left. You walk 3 blocks, then you go to the right and then to the left, and then you should be there. And then they walk away and you wonder already like, oh, wait a minute, wasn't it 3 blocks or was it 4 blocks? You already sort of feel guilty, right? Now, the problem with stories is that as soon as something has changed in the world, right, your story is not going to be that useful anymore. So, for example, if these people walk into a road obstruction, the story is no longer going to help them to navigate the landscape, right? So stories are a bad format to gain situational awareness because it doesn't really scale. And the problem is also every time that somebody asks us something, we'll have a completely new story, right? There's no common structure there's no common language to structure it. There's no frequent approaches. So when we're in a growing organization, it doesn't scale at all. So we need something else, and that thing is maps. But I forgot my joke. Tell me, what are the first apps that you open on your smartphone? Obviously, I spoiled one of them, which is Maps. But what else? Email. Okay. Another one? Radio. Okay. WhatsApp. You're all into social media. So, well, I don't know about you, but I come from a country where it sometimes rains, and so I do check the weather as well, right? That does influence what you're doing, right? Like whether or not going for a walk makes sense if it's like raining cats and dogs, right? Because those are things that you don't have choice over, right? The climate is a factor that we have to take into account, which we can sort of change. Now, these apps, they provide us with situational awareness, right? And so if we look at a map, then we can learn a bunch of things from them. So here's a map, and overlaid on it is the model of a map according to Simon Wardley. That's the author of Wardley Maps. And, well, a model of a map, it's a model. It's sometimes useful. So let's look at it, right? So a map is visual. That means like, well, we can look at it and we immediately start to form a picture, right? A picture says more than 1,000 words, and we immediately start to understand some of this landscape, right? It provides context, right? It's not a map of the entire universe throughout the entire history, right? It's a map of a very specific area within Greece about a specific battle in Greek mythology at a specific point in time. So it provides us with context. The map has position, right? I can point at individual points on the landscape, and when I point there, I'm referring to a particular point within the landscape itself, right? And because we have that, because we position those things in relationship towards of an anchor. So an anchor in a geographical map is the magnetic north, right? We see that in the top right corner. And in most maps these days, it's not visible anymore because it's implied. But that's how it works conceptually, right? So we position things in relationship towards of the anchor. And as a consequence of that, we have something called consistency of movement within the landscape. If I move my finger across the map, then I move an equal amount of space within the landscape. We also have movement, right? That's the red arrows in this case, right? So we can talk about how we want to move through the landscape and what our strategy is with that in effect. And finally, we see some components here. Who can name a component that they see here on the map? Mountains. What else? Sea. What else? Cities. Exactly, right? So we can have components, and obviously, would there be more things in this landscape than just those things? Yes, right? Yeah. So we choose the level of abstraction for a map so that it's useful for us, right? So a map is always going to be an abstraction, a reduction of reality. And so what we have to do when we're looking at a map is ask ourselves, like, is everything on here that we need in order to make a decision, right? So let's look at what a map for business and technology can look like, a Wardley map. But before we do, let's talk about a principle, right? So one of the founding principles that Wardley maps are built on is the doctrine principle, know your users. You have to understand for who you are producing something and for who you are adding value before you can talk about like any of the components that exist within your landscape. So you have to start with your users, and then you have to focus on their user need. So what is it that they need? And what they need is not necessarily what they want, right? Customers want faster horses, but that's not necessarily the same thing. It's also sometimes we've organized our processes in a particular way, and as a consequence of that, people are forced to work in a particular way, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that is what they need. So when we're mapping, we have to be really, really strict with ourselves and ask ourselves, what is their fundamental need, rather than what is it that they want, or what is it that we make them do. So let's go back to Shoppy Floppy, right? Our user is the lazy person. It starts with the couch potato that sits on there at home and wants to watch Netflix and eat some Ben & Jerry's to it, right? So what do they want? Well, they want to consume everyday items without going to the grocery store, right? And so what do they need for that? So this is the user need. And what we're now going to do is we're going to explore what the rest of the value chain looks like. And we're going to do that by using language. So we'll ask ... needs. So consume everyday items needs urgency, right? If there wouldn't be any urgency, then they would just order their groceries with a regular grocery delivery platform, or they would actually just buy them at a regular grocery store. But they want them right now. And it needs the Shoppy Floppy offering, right? Like the stuff that we're selling. Well, what does the Shoppy Floppy offering need? Well, it needs a catalog. Well, what does the catalog need? Well, it needs everyday items and it needs pricing. What does pricing need? Well, that needs suppliers. And so we can dive into the value chain by keep on asking those questions. And at some point we'll get to an area where we think like, well, beyond that, it's not that relevant anymore. So for this example, I'm going to stop at suppliers, right? So what we see is things that are in the bottom of the map are far away from the user, and things in the top of the map are in close proximity to the user. So the things that are far away to the user, do you think the user can tell the difference whether the Ben & Jerry's bucket was bought with one supplier or another? No, right? And the same applies to technology, right? They don't care if our domain events got sent over Kafka or with some cloud-native technology, right? So the further away from the user as a heuristic, the less they're able to perceive the difference. So what we have right now is we have a chain of needs, but we don't necessarily have a map yet because we don't have meaning in all directions, right? We have meaning in this direction, the proximity to the user, but we don't have anything horizontally. Let's talk about a climatic pattern. So climatic patterns are things that we don't have choice over, just as we don't have choice over whether it's very sunny today or whether it's going to be raining tomorrow. We don't have choice over certain things in a competitive landscape, right? And one of the things that we don't have choice over is the fact that everything evolves. So imagine it's the 60s and we're a fly on the wall at Bell Laboratories, right? In the boardroom. And somebody comes driving in, a small cart. There's a giant thing the size of a fridge on it. They park it in the middle of the boardroom. They take the cigarette out of their mouth. Here it is, a mobile phone. And the rest of the boardroom goes like, wait, what? And they walk around it. The whole thing is held together by rope. And yeah, it looks weird. There is no cables attached to it. There are some key codes. If they punch them, they can actually call their mom. So it demonstrates the concept, but it's not really a sellable product, right? They're amazed by it, but maybe seemingly appalled as well, right? So it demonstrates the concept. It's something novel. Wow, can we do that? But it's not really a sellable product. So imagine it's 10 years later, and that same organization produces custom-built phones for the military, for generals to call with one another, right? I don't know if they're going to be talking strategy or beers, but they can definitely communicate, right? And another 10 years later, it's the 80s, and so every Wall Street trader is carrying around one of those small suitcases. Or I had an uncle like that, where he's like super proud, sitting on the terrace, like, hey, look at me, I have a mobile phone. I'm going to call. And then another 10 years later, if you're my age, you know, we all had a Nokia 3210 in our pockets, right? To call your mother and say like, hey, yeah, I know, I'm going to be home late again. And so everything evolves, right? From the novel, wow, can we do that? But it's not really something sellable, to custom build. We can do it for one client, but if we have to do it for another client, we have to do the whole thing again, right? To a product, right, that we can sell to multiple customers. to then eventually commodity or utility, where people don't really care whether they have one supplier or another, because it's just become so standardized and so ubiquitous that it's really a necessity, right? So everything evolves. So what we can do is those components that we saw earlier, we can put those on this axis of evolution. And that's what I've done here. And what do you notice now when you look at this map? Distance? Yeah. Yeah. So, doesn't it seem weird that pricing is rather far away from the user, but it's custom? Didn't we just say that things that are far away from the user, they can't really perceive the value? But custom is something we have to do it again and again and again if we have to find new people, right? So, that's when you have a Wortly map, you don't necessarily need to be very intimately familiar with the domain. You can apply heuristics from Wortly maps to the map that you're seeing and immediately start to ask annoying and difficult questions, right? So in this case, that's actually a component that we've reused from within our larger organization. And it made sense to once upon a time to build that custom, but nowadays it doesn't make that much sense anymore, right? So we can talk about how things have evolved in our landscape and whether or not some of those decisions still make sense today, right? You see that block, everyday items. You can imagine that is actually that's called a pipeline, and that's actually sort of an ore. So eggs and coffee, that's products that have they're commonly accepted. We sell them everywhere. People really want them. If we don't sell eggs and coffee, we're basically out of business. But the map is from 2020, right? So we started to experiment with selling COVID tests in just one branch to figure out if people would actually be buying them, if they're going to purchase those. And we're now exploring whether or not to sell HIV tests, right? We're really wondering if that's something where we can add value to our customers, or perhaps this has really gone a bit too far. So how to make a map? We can identify the user, right? That's the anchor on our map, right? Everything is positioned in relationship towards our anchor. We're going to list the relevant needs of that user below the anchor, right? And think about needs, not wants, or how we've organized the process. We are asking what component is needed in order to satisfy that particular thing, right? X needs ... And then we put components on the axis of evolution, because everything evolves from genesis to custom build to product and then finally to commodity. Now, when we start to Wortly map our ecosystem, we make our assumptions explicit. The things that we assume about the world, they are made explicit in the map. And therefore, maps make it easier to challenge the strategy, because people can talk about the assumptions that underpin some of the things that we're doing. And as a consequence of that, we can start to talk about optionality. Like, okay, we can do multiple things, and maps allow us to ask, why are we doing this one thing when we could also do this other thing? We can point at areas on the map and we can say, why here, over there? And different areas of the map require different skills and attitudes. So you can imagine that in Genesis, we need sort of a gyro gear loose, the inventor of Donald Duck. And when we're in custom build, pardon my cultural insensitivity, we might have great benefit of German engineers, right? So we want to make sure that in different areas of the map, we use people with skills and attitudes that fit to that particular region of the map. And we can trace the value chain, both from the top to the bottom and from the bottom to the top, to figure out, like, hey, where are things impacting? So you might be wondering, like, yeah, okay, great, OKRs and maps, but I was here for combining them. So let's do that, right? How about OKRs? We can put ourselves on the map, right? We can put individuals, businesses, departments, your boss, we can put them on the map. And in this case, Shopee Floppy is in Genesis, right? Because we are burning VC money at an unprecedented rate. We have not yet proven our business model, right? So we're not in the clear yet. And we are launching in markets, right? We're catapulting ourselves into the market. That's our objective. That's the need of Shopee Floppy, so to say, right? And I've put that in custom build because whenever we catapult ourselves into a market, it's actually very much a custom exercise because we're such a young organization. We're still figuring out what the legislative process looks like in various countries and markets. We haven't sort of figured out how to standardize this, but I do have clients where they literally talk about provisioning a market, and there I would put it in product. So they want to catapult themselves into the market. And one of the key results that they think will explain whether or not that has succeeded is they want to see a high average order value, right? So that's one of their key results, right? And that high average order value, there is a hypothesis within the organization that they think will drive that KR. And that hypothesis is that the perception of value of the product isn't optimal, right? There's improvements to be made there. And one of the things that they want to do is they want to work on their price communication, right? So how do we communicate about our prices to the end user? And you could imagine that what they want to do is they want to work with promotions amongst others, and therefore they want to leverage strike-through pricing, right? So remember the bucket of Ben & Jerry ice? Today it's not $5.99, today it's only $4.99. And by having that price communication, that strike-through pricing, they think that they'll be able to get more out of their campaigns, right? And so here you see that we've related our objective, our key result, the hypothesis that drives it, all the way down to our pricing component. And now we get to talk with the team whether or not this actually makes sense. So somebody in the team might say like, okay, I understand what we're doing here. I do think that there is something to say for working on price communication. However, you haven't seen the pricing component. We've made some terrible choices there in the past, and it's not going to make it that easy to achieve this within 3 months of time. However, knowing what we try to achieve here, namely working on the perception of value, working on price communication, what I propose instead is that we do ... So what this allows us to do is it allows people from the bottom up to challenge some of the hypotheses that we think will drive the KRs, and the other way around. Perhaps sometimes some of the people in the organization are a bit too tunnel vision oriented on one way of solving the problem, and other people can help them challenge that approach, right? So we're relating these two worlds now. What we can also do is we can start to visualize the adoption of it, right? Like whether or not we're making any progress of it during in the process, right? So we can start to visualize that we want to drive the perception of value more to the right. Now, maybe you feel that that's a bit weird because it's not that easy. Well, what we can do is we can visualize the inertia that we might be experiencing. For example, the fact that it's very difficult to change what users' opinions are, right? That might be a bit of the inertia that we're experiencing here. But it can be different things. I've once been inertia on a map because I was very attached to a particular component and I didn't want to evolve it because, well, so much blood, sweat, and tears went into custom building that. Maybe the labels are confusing you a bit. So we can use different labels, right? Like for the hypothesis, maybe something like novel, divergent, convergent, and accepted would work better. So there's various labels for these different stages, and you can mix and match them to figure out a combination that works well for your situation. So OKRs and Wordly maps, departments, tribes, teams, even your boss if needed, they can be an anchor on the map, right? And their needs are the objective. And below that we have a hypothesis, right? That can be a set of components within a pipeline because we might have actually multiple hypotheses that are driving this. But obviously for presentation purposes, I need to keep the map simple. As proof accumulates to support our hypothesis, it will move to the right of the map. And we can start to visualize the inertia that we experience when we try to achieve our goals so that we have something to talk about. And finally, the map is a vehicle to point out our organizational bias, for example, with the custom-built pricing component, which isn't optimal, and we can talk about whether or not we should change that now or later. Now, here's a great quote from Dennis Doman. Don't take what everyone says at a conference at face value. So I do want to show you the real thing in an NDA-compatible way. So this is what the real thing looked like, right? And you see there's a lot more components to it. It's rather a large map. But it did help me to ask a lot of questions about that 17-page long strategy document and what I was seeing teams do and what I knew of the organization already. And that allowed me to ask a bunch of questions, which is the stuff you see in the top left, right? That's all the red sticky notes. And some of them were answered, and some of them were decent answers, and some of them were, well, questionable. And what this allowed me to do is it allowed me to figure out that I thought that the strategy was more sort of, well, let's just set a crazy goal and not necessarily that thought out. And as a consequence of that, I decided that this is not something that I think will succeed, and therefore I didn't invest that much in it anymore. So it's not always going to be rainbows and unicorns where, you know, you'll produce a map and yeah, okay, we can now go about it and we'll achieve our objective, right? Sometimes it will make you realize that what you're pursuing is perhaps not the thing that you should be pursuing given the situation you find yourself in. Now, how does this relate to software design? Mapping will help us by building up a common language, right? It will help us talk in the same words, both at the strategic level, how we communicate about strategy, but also about our components. It will help us to think in abstractions, right? When we have to make those components, we have to think at an abstraction level, and that helps us figuring out good boundaries. And mapping will also help us focus on user needs, which is terribly important and doesn't happen enough in most organizations. And finally, it will help us differentiate our approach, right? Some areas of the map require gyro gear loose, and some area of the map require some other attitude. So, looking back and into the future, OKRs work when they're frequently evaluated, right? And objectives should inspire and help us aim for the moon. And finally, a key result needs to be measurable and it needs to indicate success. And it should be clear why we've chosen this one thing over all of the other things that we could have been doing. Now, if we combine OKRs with wordly maps, then we can articulate business and technical strategy, both the current situation and where we want to take it, in a single picture, right? And that's very valuable. We don't have to look at 4 artifacts. We can look at one picture. We can uncover the assumptions below, and we can make it easier